Park Min-jae stood at the window of the small Coast Guard station and watched the gray clouds gather over the East Sea. He had been stationed on Hanyo Island for 3 years now, and he knew what those clouds meant. A storm was coming, maybe a big one. The island sat 40 kilometers off the coast of South Korea, small enough that most maps forgot to include it. Only 200 people lived here, mostly elderly folks who had spent their entire lives on this rocky piece of land. The younger generation had left decades ago, chasing jobs and modern life in Seoul or Busan. Only the stubborn ones remained. The ones who loved the sea too much to leave it behind. Min-jae was 28 years old, the youngest person on the island by at least 20 years. He had requested this posting after his father died. His father had been a Coast Guard officer too, and he always said the quiet posts were the most important ones. Someone has to watch over the forgotten places, his father would tell him. Those are the places that need us most. At first, Min-jae thought the assignment would be boring. Nothing ever happened on Hanyo Island. The most exciting part of his week was the supply boat that came every Thursday. But over time, he had grown to love this place. The people here were different from city folks. They were tough, independent, and kind in a way that felt real. They didn't waste words, but when they spoke, they meant what they said. The island got its name from the Hanyo, the women divers who had harvested the sea for generations. These women would dive without oxygen tanks, holding their breath for minutes at a time while they collected abalone, sea urchins, and octopus from the ocean floor. It was dangerous work. It required incredible strength and courage. Most of the Hanyo on the island were now in their 70s and 80s, but they still dove almost every day. The sea was in their blood. Min-jae walked away from the window and sat down at his desk. The station was small, just 3 rooms in a concrete building that had been painted white once but now looked gray from the salt air. His equipment was old but functional. A radio, a computer that connected to the mainland when the internet decided to work, and the emergency beacon system. The emergency beacon was supposed to be the most important piece of equipment in the station. If something terrible happened, if the island needed help fast, the beacon would send out a signal that every Coast Guard station on the eastern coast would receive. It was their lifeline to the outside world. Min-jae frowned as he looked at the beacon control box mounted on the wall. He had been going through old records that morning, and he had discovered something disturbing. The beacon system had not been inspected in 15 years. 15 years. The last inspection was dated April 2010, signed by an officer whose name Min-jae did not recognize. He stood up and walked over to the control box. The red light on top was supposed to blink every 5 seconds to show the system was active. Min-jae watched it carefully. 5 seconds passed, then 6, then 7. Finally, on the 8th second, the light blinked once. That was not right. Min-jae opened the metal cover of the control box. Inside, he saw a mess of old wires, dusty circuit boards, and corroded connections. Some of the wires had been wrapped with electrical tape that had turned yellow with age. One of the battery backup units had a small crack in its casing. "This is bad," Min-jae muttered to himself. He pulled out his phone and took several pictures of the equipment. Then he sat down at his computer and began typing a report to headquarters. The island needed a technician to come inspect and repair the beacon system as soon as possible. This was not something he could fix himself, but as he typed, Min-jae knew the truth. Headquarters would read his report and add it to a long list of maintenance requests from stations all over the country. Hanyo Island would not be a priority. It never was. The island was too small, too remote, too forgotten. The technician might come in 3 months, or 6 months, or never. The wind outside picked up, rattling the windows of the station. Min-jae saved his report and sent it off. Then he grabbed his jacket and headed outside. He needed to warn the villagers about the approaching storm. The village consisted of about 30 houses clustered around a small harbor. Most of the houses were traditional Korean homes with curved tile roofs, though a few modern concrete structures had been built in the 1980s. Fishing nets hung everywhere, drying in the wind. Small boats bobbed in the harbor, tied to weathered wooden posts. Min-jae found most of the villagers gathered at the community center, a long building with a corrugated metal roof. Inside, a group of Hanyo women sat around a table, mending their diving equipment. They wore black wetsuits that had been patched so many times they looked like quilts. The oldest of the women was Kim Soon-ja, 82 years old, with skin like leather from decades under the sun. She was the unofficial leader of the Haenyeo, the one everyone looked to when decisions needed to be made. Her eyes were sharp and bright, missing nothing. "Min-jae," she said when he walked in. "You have that worried look." "What is it, the storm?" "Yes, grandmother," Min-jae said, using the respectful term even though they were not related. "The weather service says a typhoon might be forming. It could reach us in 2 or 3 days," the women nodded. They had lived through many typhoons. This was not news that frightened them. "We will bring the boats in," Soon-ja said. "Tie everything down." "Same as always." "There is something else," Min-jae said. He hesitated, not wanting to worry them. "The emergency beacon at the station is old, very old. I am not sure it works properly." Soon-ja studied his face for a long moment. "You think if something bad happens, no one will hear us?" "I sent a report to headquarters. They will send someone to fix it. When?" Min-jae did not answer. He did not need to. Soon-ja understood. "Then we take care of ourselves," she said simply. "Like we always do," the other women murmured in agreement. They did not seem upset or afraid. This was their life. They had always been on their own. They had always survived. Min-jae stayed for another hour, drinking tea and listening to the women tell stories about past storms. They laughed as they remembered the typhoon of 1987, when the wind was so strong it blew fish right out of the sea and onto the village streets. They had collected buckets full of fish without even getting in the water. As the sun began to set, Min-jae walked back to the station. The clouds were thicker now, darker. The air felt heavy and electric. Tomorrow he would help the villagers prepare. He would make sure all the boats were secure, that everyone had enough food and water stored in case the power went out. But tonight, he sat at his desk and stared at the emergency beacon control box. The red light blinked irregularly, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, as if the machine itself could not decide whether it was alive or dying. Min-jae opened a drawer and pulled out the station's equipment manual. He flipped through the yellowed pages until he found the section on emergency beacon testing. According to the manual, he could run a diagnostic test that would send out a brief test signal. It would not be a real emergency call, just a quick pulse to verify the system was working. He stood up and walked to the control box. There was a yellow button marked Test beneath a clear plastic cover. Min-jae lifted the cover and placed his finger on the button. "Let us see if anyone is still listening," he said quietly. He pressed the button. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the machine began to hum. The hum grew louder, higher in pitch until it became almost a scream. The red light flashed rapidly like a strobe. Sparks flew from one of the circuit boards inside the box. Min-jae jumped back. Smoke began to pour out of the control box. He grabbed a fire extinguisher and sprayed foam into the machine until the smoke stopped. When the foam cleared, Min-jae saw that the beacon system was completely dead. No lights, no sounds, nothing. But somewhere, out in the electronic darkness, a signal had been sent. A broken, distorted, garbled cry for help had escaped into the air, bouncing off satellites and radio towers, searching for someone who would hear it. Min-jae did not know it yet, but that broken signal was about to change everything. Cena stood in front of a memorial wall in Seoul, reading the names of soldiers who had fought in the Korean War. There were thousands of names carved into the black stone, each one representing a life given in service. The wall stretched 30 meters in each direction, and even in the cool morning air, Cena felt the weight of what it represented. He was in South Korea filming a documentary about Korean War veterans and their families. The project had been his idea, something he had pushed for after meeting a veteran at a charity event 2 years ago. The old man had told him stories that stayed with him, stories about courage and sacrifice that most people would never hear. Cena decided then that these stories needed to be preserved, needed to be shared with the world. The camera crew stood behind him, waiting patiently. Cena was not like some celebrities who rushed through events for the cameras. He took his time. He read the names. He thought about the people they had been, the families they had left behind. This was why he did this work, not for publicity or image. He did it because it mattered. "Whenever you are ready, John," the director said softly. Cena nodded and turned to face the camera. He spoke for 10 minutes about the memorial, about the importance of remembering those who served, about how the bonds between America and Korea had been forged in fire and blood. His words were simple but powerful. He never tried to sound smarter than he was. He just spoke from the heart, and people listened. After they finished filming, Cena and his team drove across Seoul to visit a military communications center. This was not originally part of the documentary plan, but Cena had asked for it specifically. He wanted to show how modern military technology helped keep soldiers safe, how communication systems saved lives. The Korean military had agreed to give them a tour. Captain Lee Dong-hyun met them at the entrance. He was a serious man in his 40s with graying hair and the careful posture of someone who had spent decades in uniform. He shook Cena's hand firmly and led them inside. The communications center looked like something from a science fiction movie. Dozens of computer screens covered the walls, showing maps, weather patterns, and streams of data. Officers sat at workstations wearing headsets, monitoring communications from military bases all across the country and beyond. The room hummed with the sound of computers and quiet conversations. "We monitor everything from here," Captain Lee explained as they walked through the center. "Military communications, emergency signals, distress calls. If someone needs help anywhere in Korean waters or airspace, we will know about it." Cena was impressed. He asked questions constantly, wanting to understand how everything worked. The camera crew filmed, but Cena had almost forgotten they were there. He was genuinely interested in what he was seeing. They were standing near a bank of monitors when an alarm beeped softly. It was not loud or urgent, just a gentle electronic tone. A young lieutenant at a nearby workstation frowned at his screen and tapped a few keys. Captain Lee walked over to see what it was. "What do you have, Lieutenant?" "An SOS signal, sir," the lieutenant said. "But it is strange. The signal is badly distorted. It came in for about 3 seconds and then cut off completely. Origin point?" The lieutenant typed rapidly. "Hanyo Island, sir. The Coast Guard station there." Captain Lee leaned closer to the screen. "Try to contact them. See if this is a real emergency or just a malfunction." The lieutenant tried several times using different frequencies and communication channels. Each attempt resulted in silence. No response. "The island's communication system might be down," Captain Lee said. "Or this could just be an equipment failure." "That station is old. Very old." Cena stepped closer, listening. "What is Hanyo Island?" Captain Lee glanced at him, seeming surprised that Cena was still paying attention. "A small island off the east coast. Only about 200 people live there, mostly elderly. The Coast Guard maintains a station there, but it is not a priority location. Nothing much happens there. But they sent an SOS signal," Cena said. "Maybe," Captain Lee replied. "Or their equipment malfunctioned. It happens. We will file a report and have someone check on them, but it is probably nothing." The lieutenant spoke up again. "Sir, there is a typhoon warning in effect for that region. Weather Service says it could reach the island in 48 hours. Captain Lee nodded. "Note that in the report. If the island's communication system is down, they might not know about the typhoon." He turned to Cena. "Do not worry. We will make sure they are informed. This is routine." But something about the situation bothered Cena. He could not explain why. Maybe it was the casual way everyone dismissed the island as unimportant. Maybe it was the fact that a distress signal, even a broken one, had been sent from a place that was about to be hit by a typhoon. Whatever the reason, he felt uneasy. They continued the tour, and Captain Lee showed them other parts of the communications center. Cena smiled and thanked everyone, but his mind kept returning to that island. Hanyo Island, a place so small that people called it unimportant, a place that might need help but no one seemed worried about. After the tour ended, Cena and his team went back to their hotel. They had dinner planned with some veterans and their families, another event for the documentary. But Cena could not focus. During dinner, he was quieter than usual. People who knew him well noticed but did not say anything. Later that night, Cena sat alone in his hotel room with his laptop open. He searched for information about Hanyo Island. There was not much to find. A few old articles about the traditional diving women, some pictures of a rocky coastline and a small harbor, a population chart showing how the number of residents had declined from over 1,000 in 1960 to barely 200 today. He found a weather website and checked the typhoon forecast. The storm was classified as a strong typhoon, with winds possibly reaching 180 kilometers per hour. If it hit the island directly, it would be devastating. And if the island's communication system was broken, they would be cut off from the outside world. No way to call for help. No way to let anyone know if something went wrong. Cena picked up his phone and called his assistant Yoon Ji-woo. who was traveling with him. She answered on the second ring. "Jiwoo, I need you to find out something for me," Cena said. "There is an island called Henyo Island off the east coast. I need to know if anyone has checked on them today. The Coast Guard or military or anyone." "What is this about?" Jiwoo asked, but she was already typing. She had worked with Cena for 5 years and knew when he was serious about something. "I will explain later. Just find out, please." 20 minutes later, Jiwoo called him back. "I spoke to someone at the Coast Guard regional office. They say they received a report about a possible equipment malfunction at Henyo Island, but no confirmation of any actual emergency. They plan to send a technician to check the communication system next week." "Next week?" Cena repeated. "What about the typhoon?" "They say the island has been through storms before. The people there know what to do. They will be fine." Cena thanked her and hung up. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the wall. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe he was overreacting. These were professionals who knew their jobs. They would not ignore a real emergency. But what if they were wrong? Cena had spent years working with military families and disaster relief organizations. He had seen what happened when systems failed, when people fell through the cracks because they were not important enough or not loud enough. He had seen the aftermath of mistakes that could have been prevented if someone had just paid attention. He thought about his father, who had taught him that strength meant protecting people who could not protect themselves. He thought about all the times he had used his fame and resources to help others. This was just another one of those times. If he did nothing and something terrible happened to those people on that island, he would never forgive himself. Cena grabbed his phone and called his documentary producer. "David, I need to make a change to tomorrow's schedule," he said. "What kind of change?" "I need a helicopter, and I need to get to Henyo Island as soon as possible." There was a long pause. "John, that is not part of the documentary. We have interviews scheduled tomorrow with 3 veteran families. We have been planning this for months." "I know, and I am sorry, but I think there might be people who need help and I think I can get to them before this typhoon hits." Another pause. "You are serious about this?" "Completely serious," David sighed. "Let me make some calls. But John, if this turns out to be nothing, if you are wrong about this, then I will be wrong," Cena said. "I can live with that. But I cannot live with not trying." He hung up and began packing a bag. He threw in warm clothes, a first aid kit, energy bars, and bottles of water. He did not know what he would find on that island, but he wanted to be prepared. His phone rang at 2 a.m. It was David. "I got you a helicopter," the producer said. "It is expensive and complicated, but I got it. You can leave at first light." "But John, the pilot says the weather is getting worse. If you wait too long, you will not be able to fly at all." "Then we leave early," Cena said. "Thank you, David. Just be careful. And John, I hope your instinct is right about this." "So do I," Cena said quietly. Park Min-jae woke to someone pounding on the door of the Coast Guard station. He sat up quickly, disoriented. The clock on the wall showed 5:47 in the morning. Gray light filtered through the windows. He had fallen asleep at his desk after spending half the night trying to fix the broken emergency beacon. The pounding came again, more urgent this time. "Min-jae, open the door!" He recognized the voice. It was Choi Hyun-woo, one of the few men under 60 who still lived on the island. Hyun-woo worked as a fisherman and helped maintain the harbor. He was not the type to panic easily. Min-jae rushed to the door and opened it. Hyun-woo stood there, breathing hard like he had been running. His face was pale. 5 Henyo went out diving this morning," Hyun-woo said. "They have not come back." Min-jae's stomach dropped. "How long have they been out?" 2 hours. Maybe more. They usually dive for an hour, then come back. But Grandmother Sunja saw their boat still anchored near the South Rocks. No one has seen the divers. Min-jae grabbed his jacket and radio. "Get everyone to the harbor. I will bring the rescue boat." They ran together through the village. Other people were already awake, standing in their doorways or hurrying toward the harbor. News traveled fast on a small island. By the time Min-jae reached the docks, 20 people had gathered there, their faces tight with worry. The rescue boat was a small patrol vessel with an outboard motor. Min-jae had tested it just 2 days ago, making sure it was ready in case of emergency. He fired up the engine while Hyun-woo and 2 other men jumped aboard. The boat pulled away from the dock, cutting through choppy gray water. The wind had picked up overnight. The sea was rough, with waves nearly a meter high. Dark clouds covered the sky from horizon to horizon. The typhoon was coming faster than the weather service had predicted. Min-jae could feel it in the air, in the way the wind seemed to push at him from every direction at once. There, Hyun-woo pointed. About 400 meters offshore, Min-jae could see the diving boat. It was a small wooden vessel painted blue and white, anchored near a rocky outcrop where the Haenyeo often dove. The boat was empty. 5 sets of diving equipment lay on the deck, but no people. Min-jae brought the rescue boat alongside and killed the engine. The men scanned the water, looking for any sign of the divers. The waves made it hard to see anything clearly. "There!" one of the men shouted. Min-jae saw movement near the rocks. He grabbed his binoculars and focused. His blood ran cold. All 5 Haenyeo were clinging to the rocks about 50 meters away. Even from this distance, Min-jae could see they were in trouble. The rocks were sharp and jagged, barely above the waterline. Every wave that hit sent white spray high into the air. The women looked exhausted, their arms wrapped around whatever handholds they could find. "We need to get them now," Min-jae said, "before the waves get worse." He steered the rescue boat as close to the rocks as he dared, but it was dangerous. If a wave pushed them into the rocks, the boat would be smashed to pieces. The men threw a rope toward the nearest diver, but the wind caught it and blew it away from her reaching hands. They tried again. And again. The 4th attempt finally succeeded. The nearest diver, a woman named Bae Soo-min, grabbed the rope with both hands. The men pulled carefully, helping her through the water toward the boat. When she was close enough, they lifted her aboard. Soo-min collapsed on the deck, coughing and shaking. She was 73 years old, and her lips had turned blue from the cold water. Hyun-woo wrapped her in an emergency blanket, while Min-jae maneuvered the boat for another rescue attempt. One by one, they pulled the divers to safety. Each rescue took precious minutes. Each rescue was a battle against the waves and wind. By the time they reached the last diver, Kim Soon-ja, the waves had grown even larger. Soon-ja was the oldest and had been in the water the longest. She could barely hold on to the rocks anymore. "Grandmother," Min-jae shouted over the wind. "Grab the rope!" Soon-ja reached for it but missed. A wave crashed over her, and for a moment she disappeared in the white foam. When the water cleared, she was still there, but her grip on the rocks looked weaker. They threw the rope again. This time Soon-ja caught it, but she did not have the strength to hold on. The rope slipped through her fingers. "We are losing her," Hyun-woo said. His voice was tight with fear. Min-jae made a decision. He tied the rope around his own waist and handed the other end to Hyun-woo. "Hold this. I'm going in." Before anyone could argue, he jumped into the water. The cold hit him like a hammer. The East Sea was never warm, but today it felt like ice. Min-jae swam hard against the waves, fighting to reach Soon-ja. The rope played out behind him, connecting him to the boat and safety. He reached the rocks just as another wave crashed over them both. The force of the water slammed Min-jae against the rocks, scraping his shoulder, but he held on. He grabbed Soon-ja around the waist. "I have you, grandmother," he gasped. "Let go of the rocks." "I cannot," Soon-ja whispered. Her eyes were half closed. "Too tired. You must trust me." Soon-ja's fingers released their grip. Immediately the current tried to pull them away from the rocks and out to sea. Min-jae held her tight with one arm and signaled the men on the boat to pull them in. The journey back to the boat felt like it took hours, though it was probably less than a minute. Hands reached down and lifted Soon-ja out of the water first, then pulled Min-jae aboard. He lay on the deck gasping for air, his whole body shaking from cold and exhaustion. "Get us back to the harbor," Hyun-woo said, taking the helm. Fast! The rescue boat raced back toward the village. Behind them, the waves grew larger, the wind stronger. They had made it just in time. At the harbor, dozens of people waited. They helped carry the Haenyeo to the community center, which had been turned into a makeshift emergency clinic. The island had a nurse, Im Soo-kyung, but no doctor. She moved quickly between the 5 women, checking their vital signs, wrapping them in warm blankets, giving them hot tea. All 5 would survive, but it had been close. Too close. Min-jae sat outside the community center, still soaking wet, while Im Soo-kyung checked him over. She cleaned and bandaged the cuts on his shoulder where the rocks had scraped him. "You did well," she said quietly. "You saved their lives." "I almost got them killed," Min-jae replied bitterly. "If the emergency beacon had been working, I could have called for a proper rescue helicopter. We would not have had to risk everything with a small boat. The beacon is broken? I tried to test it yesterday. It sent out some kind of signal, but then the whole system died. I have no way to contact headquarters. The radio does not reach the mainland from here, and the internet connection is down because of the storm. Im Soo-kyung frowned. So we are alone. We are always alone, Min-jae said. But yes, especially now. Inside the community center, Soon-ja was starting to recover. Color had returned to her face and she was arguing with the nurse that she did not need to rest, that she was perfectly fine. That was a good sign. If Soon-ja was arguing, she was going to be all right. Min-jae stood up, wincing at the pain in his shoulder. He needed to get back to the station and try to figure out what to do about the broken beacon. Maybe he could rig something temporary, some way to send a message to the mainland. The typhoon would hit tonight or tomorrow morning. After that, they would be completely cut off for days. He was halfway to the station when he heard it. A sound that did not belong to the island. A rhythmic thumping that cut through the wind and the crash of waves. A helicopter. Min-jae stopped walking and looked up. Through the gray clouds he saw it. A civilian helicopter, white with blue markings fighting against the wind as it descended toward the island. There was no helipad on Hanyo Island, but there was a flat area near the community center that was sometimes used for supply deliveries. The helicopter landed, its rotors creating a whirlwind of dust and debris. Min-jae ran toward it along with half the village. Who would fly a helicopter to their island in this weather? Had headquarters actually sent someone? The helicopter door opened and a man jumped out. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a waterproof jacket and carrying 2 large duffel bags. It took Min-jae a moment to recognize him, because the last thing he expected was to see a famous person on Hanyo Island. But there was no mistaking that face. It was John Cena. The actor and wrestler jogged away from the helicopter, ducking under the spinning rotors. He saw Min-jae in his Coast Guard uniform and headed straight for him. "Are you the officer in charge here?" Cena asked. His Korean was decent, but clearly not his first language. Min-jae nodded, too surprised to speak. "Good," Cena said. He set down the duffel bags. "I brought emergency supplies. Food, water, medical equipment, and this." He pulled out a case and opened it. Inside was a satellite communication system. "This can connect to any Coast Guard or military frequency. I heard your emergency beacon was malfunctioning. How did you know?" Min-jae managed to ask. "I heard about the SOS signal you sent yesterday. Military Communications Center in Seoul picked it up. Most people thought it was just a false alarm, but something told me it was not." Cena looked around at the gathered villagers, at the rough sea behind them, at the darkening sky. "Looks like I was right." Min-jae felt like he was in a dream. This could not be real. "You flew here because of a broken signal?" "Yes," Cena said simply. "Because sometimes a broken signal is the loudest cry for help." He glanced at the community center. "What is the situation here? Is anyone hurt?" Min-jae quickly explained about the Hanyo divers, about the rescue that had just taken place, about how they were now cut off from the mainland with a typhoon approaching. As he spoke, Cena's expression grew more serious. "Okay," Cena said when Min-jae finished. "First, let me check on the divers. Then we need to set up this satellite system and contact the Coast Guard. They need to know what is happening here before the typhoon hits." He picked up his bags and followed Min-jae to the community center. The villagers parted to let them through, whispering to each other in amazement. Some of them recognized Cena from movies they had seen. Others had no idea who he was, but could tell he was important somehow. Inside the community center, Soon-ja looked up from her bed as Cena entered. Her eyes widened slightly, but being Soon-ja, she simply asked, "Who are you?" Cena smiled and bowed respectfully. "My name is John. I am here to help." "Good," Soon-ja said. "We need help." And that was how John Cena ended up on Hanyo Island, in the middle of the East Sea, with a typhoon approaching and an entire village depending on a broken signal that somehow he had heard when no one else was listening. The wind had grown vicious by the time they finished checking on all 5 Hanyo divers. Im Soo-kyung, the island nurse, confirmed that everyone would recover, though they needed rest and warmth. Lee Hae-won, the oldest diver at 78, had come closest to hypothermia. Her hands still shook when she tried to hold her teacup. John Cena knelt beside her bed, speaking quietly. His Korean was limited, but Min-jae translated when needed. Hae-won studied Cena's face with sharp eyes that had seen 78 years of storms and struggles. "You came because of a broken signal?" she asked through Min-jae's translation. "Yes, grandmother," Cena replied, using the respectful term. "Why?" Cena was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Because I have learned that the quietest voices are often the ones that need to be heard most. Heywan nodded slowly, seeming satisfied with that answer. She reached out and patted his hand with her wrinkled fingers. You are a good man. Thank you. Something in Cena's expression shifted. Min-jae recognized it. He had seen that look on his own father's face sometimes, a mixture of humility and determination. This was not just a celebrity doing charity work. This man genuinely cared. They left the community center and headed back to the Coast Guard station. The helicopter pilot, a weathered man named Kim Jin-soo, joined them. He kept glancing nervously at the sky. The weather is getting worse faster than expected, Jin-soo said. If we are going to leave, it needs to be in the next 2 hours. After that, I will not be able to fly safely. Then we set up the satellite system quickly, Cena said. Make sure the Coast Guard knows the situation and you can go. What about you? The pilot asked. Cena looked at Min-jae, then at the village behind them. I will stay. These people might need help when the typhoon hits. Jin-soo shook his head. That is crazy. You could be stuck here for days, maybe a week. Then I will be stuck here. Cena's voice was firm. This was not up for discussion. At the Coast Guard station, they unpacked the satellite communication equipment. The system was military-grade, compact but powerful. It could connect to any frequency and had backup batteries that would last for days. Cena had clearly prepared well. Min-jae helped set up the antenna on the roof of the station while the wind tried to knock them both off their feet. Below them, the village was a flurry of activity. People were tying down boats, boarding up windows, moving supplies to higher ground. They had done this before. They knew how to prepare. Once the antenna was secure, they went back inside and powered up the system. The equipment hummed to life, and after a few adjustments, they had a clear connection to the Coast Guard regional headquarters. The voice that came through the speaker was sharp and official. This is Coast Guard Regional Command. Identify yourself. This is Officer Park Min-jae at Hanyo Island Station. Min-jae said into the microphone. We had an emergency this morning. 5 civilian divers were stranded at sea. All were recovered safely. But we have injuries and our emergency beacon system is non-functional. There was a pause. Hanyo Island? We received a report yesterday about a possible equipment malfunction. Are you saying there was an actual emergency? Yes, sir. If we had not been able to rescue them when we did, those 5 women would have died. We need support. There is a typhoon approaching and we have elderly civilians who may need medical evacuation. Another pause. Longer this time. Stand by, they waited. The radio crackled with static. Finally, a different voice came through, older and more senior. Officer Park, this is Commander An. I am looking at the weather data now. That typhoon will hit your position in approximately 6 to 8 hours. We cannot send rescue helicopters in these conditions. It is too dangerous, Min-jae felt his chest tighten. Sir, we have civilians at risk. One of the rescued divers is 78 years old. If her condition worsens, I understand your concern, Officer Park, but I will not risk helicopter crews in a suicide mission. You will have to manage with what you have until the storm passes. Is your station secure? Yes, sir. Then take shelter. Keep the satellite system operational if possible. We will send help as soon as conditions allow. Commander An out. The connection ended. Min-jae sat back in his chair feeling defeated. He had known the answer would be no, but hearing it still hurt. Cena had been listening to the entire exchange. What did they say? Min-jae explained, his voice bitter. They say we are on our own until the storm passes. Same as always. Then we make do, Cena said simply. He stood and picked up one of his duffel bags. I brought medical supplies. Let me see what we have. For the next hour, they organized resources. Cena had packed his bags with surprising practicality. He had antibiotics, pain medication, bandages, thermal blankets, water purification tablets, and high-calorie energy bars. He also had flashlights, batteries, and a hand-crank radio. You packed like you were going to a disaster zone, Min-jae observed. I have done relief work before, Cena replied, after hurricanes, earthquakes. You learn what people actually need. It is not glamorous, but it keeps people alive. The helicopter pilot checked his watch. I need to leave now if I am going to make it back to Seoul safely. Cena walked him out to the helicopter. They shook hands and Jin-soo looked at Cena with something like respect mixed with disbelief. You are either very brave or very crazy, the pilot said. Probably both. Cena replied with a slight smile. The helicopter lifted off, fighting against the wind. It disappeared into the gray clouds, leaving Cena alone with 200 islanders and an approaching typhoon. By noon, the rain had started. Not heavy yet, just a steady drizzle that promised worse to come. The wind bent the trees and rattled every loose object in the village. The sea had transformed into a churning mass of gray water and white foam. The waves were easily 3 meters high now, crashing against the harbor walls with enough force to shake the ground. Cena and Minjai went through the village, checking on people. Most of the elderly residents had moved into the community center, which was the sturdiest building on the island. Those who chose to stay in their homes had been given supplies and instructions to come to the community center if things got bad. Sunja had recovered enough to boss everyone around, directing where supplies should be stored, making sure everyone had food and water. She treated Cena no differently than anyone else, ordering him to move boxes and help set up sleeping mats. Cena obeyed without complaint, treating her instructions with the same seriousness he would give a military commander. "She likes you," Im Suk-young told Cena as they worked together to organize the medical supplies. "How can you tell?" Cena asked. "She is letting you help. If she did not like you, she would tell you to sit down and stay out of the way." Cena smiled at that. By mid-afternoon, the rain had intensified to a downpour. The wind screamed around the buildings. The typhoon was close now. You could feel it in the way the air pressure dropped, making everyone's ears pop. The children on the island, what few there were, stayed close to their grandparents, sensing danger even if they did not fully understand it. Minjay stood at the window of the community center, watching the storm build. The fishing boats in the harbor pitched and rolled despite being tied down. The smaller boats had been pulled completely onto land. Water was already flooding the lower parts of the village. "How bad will it get?" Cena asked, coming to stand beside him. "Bad," Minjay said honestly. "These buildings have survived typhoons before, but every storm is different. If the eye passes directly over us, the winds could reach 200 kilometers per hour. At that speed, things fly apart. Roofs tear off. Windows explode. People die. Then we make sure people do not die," Cena said. There was no bravado in his voice, no performance. Just a simple statement of intention. The typhoon hit at 4:37 in the afternoon. One moment there was heavy rain and strong wind. The next moment it was as if the world had become violence itself. The wind did not blow anymore, it screamed. The rain did not fall, it attacked like bullets. The sound was so loud that people had to shout directly into each other's ears to be heard. Something hit the roof of the community center with a crash that made everyone jump. A piece of metal roofing from another building, probably. Then another crash. And another. The lights flickered and went out. Darkness filled the building, broken only by the flashlights people quickly switched on. The emergency generator kicked in after a moment, but it only powered a few overhead lights, leaving most of the large room in shadow. A woman near the back started crying. Her daughter comforted her. A child asked in a scared voice when the noise would stop. No one had an answer. The typhoon raged for hours. At one point, around 8 o'clock, part of the roof started to leak. Water dripped down in several places, and people moved away from those areas. Minjay and Cena used plastic tarps to try to catch the water, but it was impossible to stop it all. Then, just after 10 o'clock, something worse happened. Im Suk-young was checking on Lee Hae-won, the 78-year-old diver who had nearly died that morning. The old woman's breathing had become labored. Her lips had a bluish tint again. Her lung might be filling with fluid, Im Suk-young said quietly to Minjay and Cena. It happens sometimes after near drowning. Even hours later. What does she need? Cena asked. Oxygen, and stronger medication than I have here. She needs a hospital. We cannot get her to a hospital in this storm, Minjay said. No one can fly. No boat can launch. Hae-won's breathing got worse. She started coughing, a wet, terrible sound. Her daughter, a woman in her 50s, knelt beside the bed and held her mother's hand, tears streaming down her face. We are going to lose her, Im Suk-young whispered. Cena looked at the medical supplies they had organized earlier. We have oxygen, right? In the emergency kit? A small portable tank. Maybe an hour of oxygen. Then we use it, and we stabilize her as best we can until the storm passes. Cena was already moving, grabbing the oxygen tank and mask. What else do you need? Im Suk-young told him, and Cena moved with surprising efficiency, gathering supplies, following the nurse's instructions. He might be famous for action movies and wrestling, but right now he worked like a trained medical assistant, They got the oxygen mask on Haiwan. Her breathing eased slightly. Im Soo-kyung gave her medication to reduce fluid buildup in her lungs. It was not enough, not really, but it was all they had. Cena stayed by Haiwan's bedside for the rest of the night. He held her hand when she seemed frightened. He adjusted her oxygen mask when it shifted. He spoke to her softly in his limited Korean, telling her to keep fighting to stay strong. Around midnight, the typhoon reached its peak. The wind became so powerful that the entire building shook. People huddled together in the center of the room, away from the walls and windows. Some prayed. Others just held each other and waited, and through it all, John Cena stayed beside a dying old woman on a forgotten island, using his body to shield her from debris when part of the ceiling finally collapsed, proving that sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is simply refuse to let go. The typhoon lasted through the night and into the next morning. By dawn, the wind had weakened from a scream to a howl, which felt almost peaceful by comparison. The rain continued, but it was just rain now, not the horizontal assault it had been hours before. Lee Hae-won was still alive. Barely but alive, Cena had not slept. He had stayed beside her bed the entire night, monitoring her oxygen levels, adjusting her mask, and keeping debris away from her when sections of the ceiling collapsed. His clothes were soaked from the leaks in the roof. His shoulder ached where he had been hit by a piece of falling wood. But his eyes remained alert, focused on the old woman whose hand he still held. Im Soo-kyung had dozed off around 3 in the morning, exhausted from tending to various injuries throughout the storm. When she woke at dawn and checked on Hae-won, she looked surprised. "She is stable," the nurse said, checking the woman's pulse and breathing. "I thought we would lose her during the night." "She is strong," Cena said quietly. His voice was hoarse from breathing in dust when parts of the ceiling had collapsed. "So are you," Im Soo-kyung replied. As daylight filtered through the broken sections of the roof, people began to stir. They were exhausted, traumatized, but alive. The community center had held, though barely. Parts of the roof were gone. Water covered sections of the floor. But the walls had stood, and everyone inside had survived. Min-jae stood and looked around at the damage. Then he walked to what was left of the front door and stepped outside to assess the village. What he saw made his heart sink. The typhoon had torn through Hainyo Island like a beast. Half the houses had lost their roofs. Trees had been uprooted and thrown against buildings. The harbor was a disaster. Several fishing boats had broken loose from their moorings and been smashed against the dock or rocks. Debris covered every street. Power lines were down. The Coast Guard station, which had been built of concrete, was still standing but had suffered major damage to its roof and one wall. And yet, somehow, it could have been worse. The sturdiest buildings had survived. The community center, despite its damage, had protected everyone inside. The island had been battered but not destroyed. Cena came to stand beside Min-jae. He looked at the destruction in silence for a long moment. "This will take months to repair," Min-jae said. "Then we start now," Cena replied. Over the next few hours, people emerged from the community center to check on their homes and belongings. Some cried when they saw the damage. Others just stood in shock. But the people of Hainyo Island were resilient. They had survived typhoons before. They would survive this one too. Soon-ja, despite having nearly died the day before, took charge immediately. She organized work groups. Some people would clear debris from the streets. Others would check on homes and identify which ones were still safe to occupy. A few would inventory remaining food and water supplies. Cena worked alongside everyone else. No one treated him like a celebrity. They treated him like one of them, and he seemed to prefer it that way. He helped clear fallen trees. He hammered tarps over damaged roofs. When an elderly man struggled to move a heavy piece of debris, Cena simply walked over and lifted it himself. By mid-morning, the satellite communication system at the Coast Guard station was operational again. Min-jae contacted regional headquarters. "This is Officer Park at Hainyo Island. The typhoon has passed. We have extensive structural damage but no fatalities. However, we have one civilian in critical condition who needs immediate medical evacuation." The response was quick this time. "Understood. Weather conditions are improving. We will have a medevac helicopter there within 2 hours. Stand by." True to their word, a military helicopter arrived 90 minutes later. The medics loaded Lee Hae-won onto a stretcher and prepared to transport her to the mainland hospital. Her daughter wanted to go with her, but there was not enough room in the helicopter. Haewon reached out and grabbed Cena's hand one more time before they loaded her into the aircraft. She was too weak to speak, but her eyes said everything. "Thank you. You saved me." Cena squeezed her hand gently. "You will be fine, grandmother. You are the strongest person I have met." The helicopter lifted off and disappeared toward the mainland. Everyone stood watching until it was out of sight. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity. More helicopters came, bringing supplies, medicine, and engineers to assess the damage. The Coast Guard sent a team to repair Minjae's station and install a new emergency beacon system. News crews arrived wanting to document the typhoon's impact, and that was when the story exploded beyond the island. A journalist recognized John Cena working alongside the villagers, covered in dirt and sweat, helping to rebuild a collapsed fence. The journalist took photos and video. Within hours, the images had spread across the internet. John Cena, one of the most recognizable people in the world, had risked his life to reach a forgotten island based on nothing but a broken distress signal. He had stayed through a typhoon that could have killed him. He had spent the night protecting an elderly woman who meant nothing to his career or image. He had done it because it was right. The story went viral. Millions of people saw the images and videos. They saw Cena carrying debris, saw him hammering tarps over damaged roofs, saw him holding Lee Haewon's hand in the hospital helicopter. The comment sections exploded with admiration and respect. But on Haenyo Island itself, Cena tried to avoid the attention. When journalists asked him questions, he redirected them to talk about the villagers instead. "Do not make me the story," he told one persistent reporter. "These people survived a typhoon. These Haenyo women have been diving in dangerous waters for decades. Officer Park risked his life to save them. That is the real story." On the third day after the typhoon, Cena sat with Minjae outside the repaired Coast Guard station. The sun had finally come out and the island looked almost peaceful again, despite all the damage. "You could have left on any of those helicopters," Minjae said. "Why did you stay?" Cena thought about the question. "I grew up learning that strength is not just physical. Real strength is showing up when people need you and staying until the job is done. These people needed help. The job is not done yet. But you have a life, work, important things. This is important," Cena said simply. "Maybe the most important thing I have done in years." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Minjae asked the question that had been bothering him. The broken SOS signal. The military communications center said most people thought it was just equipment failure. "What made you think it was real?" Cena was quiet for a moment. "My father was a veteran. He always said that sometimes the quietest cry for help is the one you need to listen to most carefully. When I heard that a distress signal came from a place called Haenyo Island, a place so small that most people have never heard of it, something just felt wrong. Like if we ignored it, we would be making a terrible mistake." "Your instinct saved lives," Minjae said. "No," Cena corrected him. "You saved lives. You went into the water to rescue Soonja when anyone else would have given up. I just made sure you were not doing it alone." That evening, the village held a dinner in the community center to thank everyone who had helped during the crisis. The food was simple but plentiful. People sat together on the floor, sharing stories about the typhoon, about the rescue, about everything that had happened. Soonja stood up at one point, and everyone fell silent. She was still weak from her ordeal, but her voice was strong. "For many years, people have forgotten about Haenyo Island," she said. "We are too small, too far away, too old. The young people left. The government ignored us. We learned to take care of ourselves because no one else would." She looked directly at Cena. "But you did not forget us. You heard us when we could not even hear ourselves. You came when no one asked you to come. You stayed when anyone else would have left. You are part of this island now, part of our family." The villagers erupted in applause. Several elderly women stood and bowed deeply to Cena. Men who had worked beside him for 3 days clasped his shoulder in respect. Cena seemed genuinely moved. He stood and bowed back, lower and more formally than any of them had bowed to him. "Thank you," he said in Korean. "But I am the one who should thank you. You taught me what real strength looks like. It is not in muscles or fame. It is in diving into cold water every day to feed your family. It is in surviving storms that would break most people. It is in never giving up, even when the world forgets you exist." He paused, searching for the right words. I will make sure the world remembers you now. I will make sure people know about Hanyo Island, about the Hanyo divers, about all of you. You will never be forgotten again. More applause. But quieter this time. Emotional. Several people were crying, including Im Soo-kyung. Later that night, Cena used the satellite system to make several phone calls. He spoke to his foundation, to government contacts, to journalists he trusted. He was setting things in motion. Min-jae listened and realized that Cena was not making empty promises. He was actually going to follow through. The island was about to change, whether they were ready for it or not. The next morning, a Coast Guard boat arrived to take Cena back to the mainland. He had delayed long enough. He had work obligations that could not be postponed anymore, but as he prepared to leave, he made Min-jae a promise. I will be back, Cena said, in 6 months. I want to see how things have improved, and I want to make sure that new emergency beacon system is working perfectly. We will be ready for your visit, Min-jae replied. They shook hands, and then Cena did something unexpected. He pulled Min-jae into a brief hug, the kind soldiers give each other after surviving battle together. You are a good officer, Cena said. Your father would be proud. Then he was gone, boarding the Coast Guard boat and disappearing toward the mainland, leaving behind an island that would never quite be the same. 6 months later, Park Min-jae stood at the new Coast Guard station and barely recognized the island he had called home for 3 years. The old station had been completely rebuilt. The new structure was twice the size, with modern equipment, backup power systems, and living quarters for additional staff. The emergency beacon system was state-of-the-art, with redundant backups and satellite integration that made it virtually impossible to fail. A proper helipad had been constructed on level ground behind the station, but the changes went far beyond just his station. The Korean government, embarrassed by the international attention John Cena had brought to the island's neglected infrastructure, had poured money into improvements. Every damaged home had been repaired or rebuilt. A new medical clinic stood where an old storage building used to be, staffed by a full-time doctor and 2 nurses. The harbor had been reinforced with new concrete walls. Solar panels now provided backup power to essential buildings. A high-speed internet connection had been installed, connecting the island to the world in ways it had never been before. The population had not grown much, but it had stabilized. A few families with young children had moved to the island, drawn by the improved infrastructure and the attention Hanyo Island was now receiving. The school, which had closed 5 years ago for lack of students, had reopened with 12 children. Perhaps most importantly, tourists had discovered the island. Not huge numbers, but enough to make a difference. People came to see the legendary Hanyo divers, to hear their stories, to watch them work. A small guest house had opened. A restaurant served traditional seafood dishes. The island had found a way to preserve its heritage while building a sustainable future. Min-jae checked his watch. The boat carrying John Cena would arrive any minute now. True to his word, Cena was returning for a visit. But this time he was bringing something special. The Coast Guard boat appeared on the horizon right on schedule. As it approached the new harbor, Min-jae could see several people on board. Cena, of course, easily identifiable even from a distance, but there were others too. The boat docked and Cena stepped off, grinning broadly. He looked tan and healthy, though his hair was a little longer than before. Behind him came a camera crew, a documentary team that had been filming his return journey. But the person who made everyone on the dock gasp was Lee Hae-won, the 78-year-old diver who had nearly died in Cena's arms 6 months ago, now walked down the gangplank on her own, moving slowly but steadily. Her daughter walked beside her, ready to help if needed, but Hae-won clearly wanted to do this herself. A cheer went up from the gathered villagers. Soon-ja rushed forward, and the 2 old women embraced, both crying and laughing at the same time. Hae-won had spent 2 months in the hospital recovering from her lung injury. No one had been sure she would survive, but here she was, back on Hanyo Island, ready to come home. Cena waited patiently until the reunion was over, then walked over to Min-jae. They clasped hands warmly. The island looks incredible, Cena said, looking around. I knew there would be changes, but this is beyond what I imagined. You made this possible, Min-jae replied. Your story brought attention. That attention brought resources. No, Cena corrected him gently. You and these people made this possible. I just helped amplify your voices. The world needed to hear your story. Over the next few hours, Cena toured the island with Minjai serving as his guide. The documentary crew filmed everything, capturing the rebuilt village, the new facilities, and most importantly, the people. They visited the new medical clinic, where the doctor showed them the equipment that would have saved Li Haiwan so much suffering if it had been available during the typhoon. They saw the repaired school, where children were learning about the Henyo tradition alongside modern subjects. They walked through the village and spoke with elderly residents who had lived on the island their entire lives. At the harbor, several Henyo were preparing for an afternoon dive. Sunja, now 83, was among them. She insisted she could still dive, though the doctor had limited her to shallow waters and shorter sessions. "Grandmother, should you really be diving?" Cena asked with concern. Sunja laughed. "If I stop diving, I stop living. The sea is who I am." She invited Cena to watch them work. The documentary crew set up their cameras while the Henyo women, ranging in age from 65 to 83, pulled on their wetsuits and checked their equipment. They moved with practiced efficiency, each woman knowing exactly what to do. Then they were in the water, disappearing beneath the surface one by one. Cena watched through binoculars, fascinated. Even from the shore, you could see their skill. They dove deep, staying underwater for what seemed like impossibly long times, then surfaced with bags full of abalone and sea urchins. "They are incredible," Cena said softly. "They are the last of their kind," Minjay replied. "In 20 or 30 years, there may be no Henyo left. The young women do not want to learn this tradition anymore. It is too hard, too dangerous. That would be a tragedy." "Yes, but maybe this attention will change that. Maybe some young women will see their grandmothers on television and decide to learn the old ways. Maybe the tradition will survive after all." That evening, the village held a celebration. It was officially to dedicate the new Coast Guard station, but really it was an excuse to welcome Cena back and thank him once again for everything he had done. The event was held in the newly renovated community center. The building that had barely survived the typhoon now gleamed with fresh paint and new roof tiles. Long tables were set up with food, traditional Korean dishes prepared by the island's best cooks. Musicians played traditional instruments. Children ran around, their laughter filling the air with life. At the head table sat Cena, Minjai, Sunja, Haiwan, and several village elders. The mayor of the regional district had even made the journey to attend, bringing a government proclamation declaring Henyo Island a protected cultural site. When it was time for speeches, Sunja stood first. Her voice was strong and clear. "6 months ago, we were forgotten, ignored, left to survive on our own. Then a typhoon came and we thought we might not survive. But we did. We survived because people cared. Because Officer Park risked his life to save us. Because John Cena heard a broken signal that almost no one else was listening to." She paused, looking around at the gathered crowd. "Today, we are not forgotten anymore. The world knows about Henyo Island. The world knows about our tradition, our strength, our story, and it is all because one man decided that we mattered." She turned to Cena. "You saved our bodies during the typhoon, but you saved our future too. You gave us hope that the world still cares about places like this, about people like us. We will never forget what you did." The crowd applauded. Several people wiped tears from their eyes. When it was Cena's turn to speak, he stood and looked around at all the faces watching him. He had given speeches to crowds of thousands before. He had spoken at major events on television shows in front of world leaders. But somehow this felt more important than any of those moments. When I first heard about the distress signal from Henyo Island, most people told me it was nothing, just a broken machine, not worth investigating. But something in me said I needed to come here, needed to see for myself. He smiled, remembering that chaotic day 6 months ago. I arrived thinking I would help for a few hours and then leave. Instead, I stayed for 3 days. I lived through a typhoon with you. I sat beside Li Haiwan and prayed she would survive. I worked alongside Sunja and all of you to rebuild after the storm. His voice grew more serious. Those 3 days changed me. I have spent my life building physical strength, becoming famous for how much weight I can lift or how tough I am in the ring. But you showed me what real strength looks like. Real strength is diving into freezing water every day to provide for your family. Real strength is surviving for decades on a forgotten island and never giving up. Real strength is being 78 years old and fighting to take one more breath because you are not ready to leave this world yet. He looked at Haiwan, who smiled at him with tears in her eyes. I came here thinking I would save you, but you saved me. You reminded me why strength matters. It is not about being the biggest or the strongest or the most famous. It is about showing up when people need you. It is about using whatever power or platform you have to help those who cannot help themselves. Cena reached into his bag and pulled out a wooden box. He opened it carefully. Inside was the diving basket that Sunja had presented to him after the typhoon. She had made it by hand, using techniques passed down through generations of Henyo women. It was a symbol of trust, of family, of acceptance. I keep this in my home, Cena said, holding it up so everyone could see. I look at it every day. It reminds me that no place is too small to matter. No voice is too quiet to hear. No person is too forgotten to deserve help. He set the basket down gently. I made you a promise 6 months ago. I promised you would never be forgotten again. I am keeping that promise. My foundation has established a fund specifically for preserving traditional communities like Henyo Island. We will help maintain your infrastructure. We will support your cultural heritage. We will make sure your story continues to be told. The crowd erupted in applause, but Cena raised his hand for silence. But I need something from you too. I need you to keep being exactly who you are. Keep diving. Keep telling your stories. Keep showing the world what real strength and real courage look like, because that is the gift you have given me, and I want you to give it to everyone else too. The applause that followed lasted several minutes. People stood, cheering, crying, celebrating. Minjae looked around at the faces of his neighbors, his friends, his island family, and saw something he had not seen in 3 years. Genuine hope for the future. Later that night, after most people had gone home, a small group sat outside the community center under the stars. Cena, Minjae, Sunja, Haewon, and Im-soo-kyung shared a bottle of soju and talked about everything and nothing. Will you really come back? Sunja asked Cena. Or was this a final goodbye? Cena smiled. I will come back. Maybe not for 6 months, but I will come back. This place is part of me now. You are part of me now. Good, Sunja said simply. Because you are part of us too. As they sat there, Minjae thought about his father's words from years ago. Someone has to watch over the forgotten places. Those are the places that need us most. His father had been right, but what his father had not told him was that sometimes the forgotten places teach us just as much as we help them. Sometimes they show us what really matters in life. Sometimes they remind us that strength is not about being invincible. It is about being there when you are needed, staying when others would leave, and fighting for people who cannot fight for themselves. The next morning, Cena prepared to leave once again. The documentary crew had captured everything they needed. The boat was ready to take them back to the mainland. But before he left, Cena walked down to the harbor one more time. Haewon was there, sitting on a bench and watching the sea. She had not fully recovered her strength yet, but every day she was getting better. Cena sat down beside her. Thank you, she said in English. She had been practicing. You already thanked me, grandmother. Not just for saving me. Thank you for seeing us. For believing we mattered. Cena took her weathered hand in his. You have always mattered. I just made sure other people knew it too. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the waves roll in. Finally, Haewon spoke again. The sea is strong. It takes and takes and takes. But we are stronger. We keep diving. We keep living. We never give up. No, Cena agreed. You never give up. As the boat pulled away from the harbor, Cena stood at the railing and watched Henyo Island grow smaller in the distance. The new Coast Guard station stood proudly on the shore. The village looked clean and cared for. The people waved from the dock and Cena waved back until he could not see them anymore. The documentary that came out 3 months later was called The Forgotten Island. It told the complete story, from the broken distress signal to the typhoon rescue to the rebuilding and revival of Henyo Island. It won several awards and was seen by millions of people around the world. But for John Cena, the real reward was simpler. It was knowing that a place that had been forgotten was now remembered, that voices that had been ignored were now heard, that an SOS signal that almost no one noticed had become a call that changed everything. And sometimes, late at night in his home, Cena would look at the handmade diving basket sitting on his shelf and remember what real strength looks like. It looks like an 82-year-old woman diving into cold water. It looks like a Coast Guard officer swimming through waves to save lives. It looks like an entire village refusing to give up, no matter how forgotten they might be. Strength is not just physical. Real strength is showing up. Real strength is caring. Real strength is hearing the quietest cry for help and deciding to answer it, no matter what it costs. That was the lesson of Henyo Island. And it was a lesson John Cena would carry with him for the rest of his life.